Gun trucks are a unique yet completely overlooked part of the Vietnam War. They were among the most ambushed units in the entire conflict, earned 2 Medals of Honor, and yet weren't even an official army branch. They were born as a response to horrific ambushes that were decimating supply convoys, then evolved into something no one could have imagined. This is their whole story: exciting, dark, and tragic. By the summer of 1967, American ground operations in Vietnam had grown into a massive logistical burden. Hundreds of forward bases across the country, especially in the Central Highlands, were entirely dependent on truck convoys. Every rifle round, artillery shell, and gallon of fuel for helicopters and vehicles came by trucks. Without roads like Route QL-19, stretching from the coastal port of Quy Nhon to inland bases like An Khê and Pleiku, the entire US military footprint in the region would collapse. The air cavalry was fast, mobile, and gave the US a massive advantage in the jungle terrain. But the enemy quickly realized that the entire division depended on ground supply convoys. They were traveling on over 100 miles of long and isolated roads, while convoys were made up of soft-skinned cargo trucks with minimal or no firepower. What could possibly go wrong? The drivers were not infantrymen. Most were 20-year-old kids with just basic weapons training and a rifle. Convoy protection was usually 2 or 3 jeeps with mounted M60 machine guns, along with the driver's personal weapons. But besides that, the trucks were sitting ducks. At first, this wasn't seen as a problem. The doctrine had carried over from the Korean War and earlier, where ambushes were relatively rare and usually involved smaller, less organized enemy forces. But in Vietnam, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army studied US operations closely. They soon understood that the trucks were the Achilles heel of the American war effort, and unlike heavily protected firebases, truck convoys moved on a predictable schedule, down known routes through jungles, and often without direct combat support. Then came the day that would change everything. September 2nd, 1967. That afternoon, a massive US convoy of around 90 vehicles was returning to Quy Nhon. The road had dense jungle within 10 feet of the edge, and with sharp turns, visibility was severely limited. It later got the nickname Ambush Alley. You probably wonder why. The NVA had an estimated 60 to 80 soldiers dug into prepared fighting positions on a slope above the road, camouflaged and waiting. As the lead vehicles came into the kill zone, a recoilless rifle round slammed into the lead gun jeep, killing the vehicle commander instantly. A series of mines mounted on wooden planks were pulled across the road and detonated, disabling multiple trucks and stopping the column cold. The hillside erupted with gunfire. Claymore mines, automatic weapons, and RPGs rained on the convoy. Drivers armed only with M14 or M16 rifles and a few magazines were caught completely off guard. Some tried to return fire from their vehicles, others climbed out and fought from the roadside. At least 3 trucks were overrun by enemy fighters who climbed onto the cabs and threw satchel charges inside or fired through the windshields. The ambush zone stretched nearly a kilometer and trucks were now burning. In just 10 minutes, 30 vehicles were destroyed or disabled, 7 Americans were dead, and 17 more wounded. Many of the drivers had no idea what the standard operating procedure was. No one had expected this, but the NVA had. This ambush was a deliberate test run to probe the convoy system, measure American response time, and learn how long they had before gunships or reaction forces arrived. In this case, helicopters from the 1st Cavalry Division showed up after about 10 minutes, and gunships eventually helped push the enemy off the hill. But by then, the damage was already done. This event sent shockwaves through the entire 8th Transportation Group. The war had changed, and the drivers now knew it. Before this, driving a truck wasn't frontline duty. After September 2nd, they no longer had that illusion. They were now prime targets. The army had to do something fast. The military police began increasing their route patrols and more checkpoint responsibilities were assigned. Engineers brought in roam plows to carve out wide lanes along the jungle roads, stripping back cover where ambushers could hide. It may have helped a bit, but it wasn't enough. The road was simply too long, too remote, and impossible to make safe for the whole length. And the enemy was well aware of that, as they were the masters of jungle and guerrilla tactics. To protect them, something had to ride alongside the loaded trucks at their crawling speed in hills and sharp turns. But tanks and armored fighting vehicles were scarce in supply and already more than busy fighting at the front lines. So that's when the real solution began to take shape in the hands of the transportation group and their young drivers, barely in their 20s. They took what they already had, 2.5-ton cargo trucks, and tried to make them into a mobile fighting unit. They lined it with sandbags and wooden boxes for protection and put 1 or 2 machine guns they could find. They tried to escort the convoy with that, but then came the first rain. The sandbags soaked up water like sponges, became heavy, and overloaded the trucks, cracked suspension, and overheated them. That's when the switch to steel began. Mechanics and engineers in the field started cutting armor from wrecked vehicles, abandoned landing craft, or downed helicopters. It wasn't uniform in any way, but they used whatever they could find, usually tactically borrowing it, another way to say steel. But when someone's life depends on it, everything is justified. Sheets were cut and welded onto the beds and side walls, creating an armored box. Sandbags, planks, or rubber were added on the floor to provide some protection against mines, which were a major threat. The cargo bed got steel panels around the perimeter to protect the gunners from small arms fire and shrapnel. The cab was also armored as much as possible, as well as the engine, fuel tanks, and vital components. If the trucks stopped in the kill zone, they were dead. Very soon, each gun truck became a unique creation, depending on what material was available and who was doing the work. It got a creative nickname painted on, as well as a black finish to make it look more intimidating. The initial armament was just 1 or 2 M60 machine guns, but soon came 50 caliber M2 Browning heavy machine guns as the preferred option. However, this was just the beginning. Trucks were now ready to be tested, and crews didn't know exactly what to expect, but they couldn't even dream that they would be earning the highest military awards in them. They were their only real protection against ambushes now spiraling out of control. They didn't have to wait long to see it in combat. Very soon, in 1967, one convoy came under heavy fire from automatic weapons and grenades. At the rear was the gun truck that immediately opened up with its machine guns and pushed forward to protect the cargo trucks. It received some hits, but the enemy was pushed off by its aggressive action. So now, gun trucks were rapidly expanding. Crews began experimenting with spaced armor to counter RPG-shaped charges and armor-piercing rounds. Eventually, they would get standard pre-cut armor plates so they didn't have to scavenge scrapyards to find them. Very soon, 2.5-ton trucks were replaced with the heavier M54 5-ton trucks. They could carry more armor and weapons without overheating in steep hills, and became the preferred platform. They even tried modifying M51 dump trucks, but the most radical modification was definitely loading an M113 armored personnel carrier on a cargo bed. They would take damaged, knocked-out armored carriers, strip them of tracks, engines, and everything besides armor and mounts for guns, and load them onto trucks, using their armored shell as a gun box. It was top-heavy and made the truck overloaded and unbalanced, but it worked. Some units mounted it facing forward and some facing backwards, depending on how they wanted their truck to be balanced. Armament also evolved. Trucks now had multiple M60s covering each angle and double or even quadruple 50s. The goal was to unleash as much firepower as possible in the shortest time, to overwhelm the attackers and break off the ambush. Some mounted miniguns salvaged from damaged helicopters. A rare few had M45 Quad 50s, originally designed for anti-aircraft defense, offering enormous suppressive firepower. Crews also carried M79 grenade launchers, grenades, their standard rifles, and more than enough ammo to ruin a day for any ambush team. Gun trucks usually had around 5 men and were now a formidable mobile fighting unit, and the enemy gave it a nickname, the Dragon's Breath, for a reason. Gun trucks were positioned throughout the convoy, usually at the front, in the middle, and at the rear. At first, it was thought that 1 gun truck for every 10 cargo trucks was enough, but that soon proved to be wrong, and that ratio changed to 5-to-1 when possible. When an ambush happened, while cargo trucks pushed on to escape the kill zone, gun trucks drove toward the gunfire and provided protection as best as they could. They would also rescue wounded drivers from disabled trucks and make sure everyone left the kill zone as fast as possible. There were 2 major tactics in countering the ambush. One was driving to the edge of the kill zone and laying down suppressive fire, but more often it meant driving directly into the kill zone, especially when cargo trucks were hit. The other tactic was called bumping. The lead gun truck in a long convoy would stop briefly in the kill zone and open fire until the second truck came and took its place. The first gun truck could then continue with the rest of the convoy so no one stayed without protection. Each crew worked out the best tactics together for maximum effectiveness. Now let's take a look at what some of the truck crews did to earn them the highest military honor. 23rd February 1971, the Brutus ambush and K Pass. A 5-ton gun truck, Brutus, was near the front of the convoy, navigating the section of road known as a hotspot for ambushes. When the convoy reached the sharp bend, enemy fire erupted from the hillside. Brutus was among 6 fuel tankers and immediately returned fire. 2 tankers went up in flames, but Brutus held its position while other gun trucks raced to assist. Brutus was then hit by a rocket, killing crewman Callison and wounding 2 others, but Brutus remained in the fight. To make matters worse, their minigun jammed. However, soon came a temporary ceasefire and things went completely quiet for a brief moment. That's when a squad of NVA troops jumped out of the jungle and charged Brutus. One enemy hurled a grenade into the open gunbox. Specialist 4 Larry Dahl saw that, called out a warning, and threw himself on the grenade. The blast killed him instantly and wounded the rest of the crew, but Larry saved them as it would have killed them all. The driver didn't even know what happened, but reacted and pressed through the smoke and flames of burning tankers, bringing them out of the kill zone and to the first checkpoint, where they were medevaced. Larry Dahl's sacrifice saved the crew, and he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. 25th August, 1968, Specialist 4 William Say. Say wasn't a gun truck crewman, but a driver in a transportation convoy. However, his story definitely deserves a place in our video. A long 81-truck convoy hauling fuel and artillery ammunition was passing through the village of Apnee. They had no gun trucks, just 8 jeeps with M60s and drivers with M16s and 100 rounds of ammo. Lead vehicles spotted men in ARVN uniforms with M16 rifles, but something felt off. They were supposed to be allies, but just seconds later they opened fire on the convoy, and the ambush began from all sides. William Say was driving a truck with artillery powder charges, and knowing what he was sitting on, he jumped out and took cover. Another driver joined him, but they stumbled upon VC fighters within 10 meters of them. Say opened fire immediately, dropping 2 of them, while another driver got 1. Then his M16 jammed. Say then spotted a sniper in a tree about 75 meters away and took him out. When a grenade fell beside him, he tossed it back just before it exploded, killing the couple of VC who had thrown it. Say would actually kick or toss back 3 grenades in just a couple of minutes, somehow miraculously before they exploded. He was hit in the wrist but continued fighting and organizing the defense with the rest of the drivers. He dropped 3 more VCs who charged across the road, but just seconds later, a sniper hit him in the head, killing him instantly. He was just 60 days short of going home. He also was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. Despite being dismantled and left behind after the war ended, the gun truck concept didn't die. It evolved into today's modern convoy protection platforms. But in Vietnam, they were the lifeline of American forces.